Okay, and Teams now tells me that we are live. Um, Nota, can I just ask you to do your thing with the spotlighting so we've got the right people on the screen? That would be brilliant. So I will make a start as as colleagues join us. I can see there are people coming in steadily. So good afternoon. Welcome to this Bristol One City webinar on shaping Bristol's cultural future. My name is Jude Langdon. I'm head of the City Office for Bristol One City. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with Bristol One City, but for those of you who might be a bit less so, Bristol One City is an approach in Bristol that brings together a wide range of stakeholders from across public, private, third sector, academia to come together in tackling some of the biggest challenges and the greatest opportunities in the city, and those that we can really only hope to make a difference on through meaningful collaboration. So I head up the city office. We are a small team that provides the engine room to Bristol's One City approach. This is the second in our monthly series of webinars that we are calling our foundation series as we make our way through the critical enablers of Bristol's recently refreshed One City plan. The purpose of this series of webinars as a whole is to make a contribution to our ambition to create more opportunities for more people to hear about and participate in Bristol One City, so that, as a movement, One City really feels like it belongs to the city. And then through this series of webinars, we're delighted to be bringing together some of the most interesting voices in Bristol and beyond to share thoughts, conversation on some of the most pressing and exciting topics. We hope that the next hour and a bit will be illuminating and thought-provoking. So a few notes from me on housekeeping before I hand over to our host for the rest of the afternoon. The session will be recorded in full and will be shared after the event on our YouTube channel. We'll share the link directly with everyone who subscribed to the session today. We will be using the Q&A function today, so there's not a live chat, but there is a question and answer function. We'll have a little under an hour of input from our speakers and around 15-20 minutes, give or take, for audience questions later on. So please do submit questions as we go, and then we'll feed those through to the panel towards the latter part of the session. So my final role is to have the privilege of introducing our host and also our first contributors today, Professor Justin Lewis. Justin is a Professor of Communication and Creative Industries at the School of Journalism, Media and Cultural Studies at Cardiff University, JOMEC to its friends. He's the Director of Cluster, which is the AHRC and Welsh Government funded innovation centre for the screen and news sectors, and is also Director of Media Cymru. He was formerly head of school and Dean of Research for JOMEC, and while in this role, he established a Centre for Community Journalism and Creative Cardiff. He's a Fellow of the Learned Society of Wales and a Fellow of the British Academy. Welcome, Justin. I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Jude. Okay, I was asked to come in as a kind of external set of eyes and an external voice to chair this session. I'll just start with telling you a little bit about me and what I've been doing and what kind of perspective I bring to this discussion. So for the last 10 years or so, I've helped to build a kind of creative industries cluster in the city of Cardiff and expand out across Wales. As Jude mentioned, I set up Creative Cardiff, or helped set up Creative Cardiff, which is very much a collaboration and sort of networking sort of platform for creatives across the city. And Creative Cardiff, as all our work has been really, has focused on what we think the heart of the creative industries is, which is not on the whole large companies, but micro businesses and freelancers. And we've worked very, very closely with them over the last 10 years. We celebrated our 10th birthday a few months ago in order to make Cardiff, the city, the kind of creative city that it can be and wants to be. We have around 4,000 members as part of that. Jude also mentioned that I've been the director of two major creative industries innovation initiatives, Cluster and Media Cymru, which is very much still ongoing. I'm also the co-director of the Centre for the Creative Economy. Just a couple of thoughts really about what I've learned during that and what lessons there might be for a city like Bristol, and what our relationships have been with Bristol. In Wales, we have a word, cynefin. Cynefin is, I guess it sort of translates as place, but it means more than that. It means sense of place, the spirit of a place, the feeling of a place. And Cardiff is a place whose cynefin was shaped by the mining and manufacturing industries. It was the pinnacle of the Industrial Revolution. That's all gone. And what we're seeing is a new set of industries emerge, and the creative industries and the cultural industries are very much at the heart of that. Cardiff now, 1 in 6 jobs in Cardiff are now in creative businesses. And the media sector in Cardiff has become particularly strong. It's one of the top 3 in the UK, along with London and Manchester. And we've seen over the last few years an 84% growth rate in the number of new creative businesses in our place. Now, Bristol, of course, has real strengths in the creative and cultural industries. And I've worked in parallel, really, with colleagues in Bristol for the last decade. More than that, really, we were part with them of the React project, which was led out of Bristol. We both were part of the Creative Industries Cluster Programme. Both Cardiff and Bristol were funded to develop their creative clusters. And we're the only 2 regions in the UK to have had major UK RI, UK research and innovation investments in the creative industries. What we also share, I think, is an approach. When we look at kind of some of the funding goals that we've had from funding councils, they are very clear that they want to see economic growth. But we've been clear in our conversation with them that we're not just interested in that. We're interested in social growth, in cultural growth. Specifically, one of the things that is our mantra really for the work that we do is we talk about any growth has to be green and it has to be fair. And we also are happy to embrace the idea that small is beautiful. Having lots of a sector made up of small independent companies, we see as a virtue. Now, all of those things I think are not a given, and I think from many conversations over a long period with colleagues in Bristol, those are very much shared ideals. Now, that requires intervention, I think. In the past, technological developments like television and radio were very much tied to the notion of the public good. If you think how long it took for Channel 4 to come into existence, it took, almost a 10-year conversation to shape that. That's all changed since the 80s and 90s, and we've increasingly relied on the market to deliver what are extraordinary and transformative developments in communications technology that have disrupted the creative industries in the last 3 decades, but they're driven by profit, not by public value. And I think we've seen the consequences of that. As a country, we're no happier, no better informed than we probably were 30 years ago when none of these amazing technologies existed. That's a colossal failure of how we've gone about organising our culture. So what I'm hoping this discussion will begin to do is think about how culture can contribute towards the growth of a city in every possible way, and that's very much the focus, I think. In Wales, we have, some of you will know this, we have something called the Future Generations, or the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. That's an act that was passed by the Welsh Parliament that basically says that anything the Welsh Government does should have at its heart the interests of the well-being of future generations. I think it's a great concept. Whether it always is realised in practical terms is a matter for debate, but I think it's a great idea and a great guiding principle. So today, the purpose of today is to talk about how we might begin to do that, the value of culture in, if you like, building a city as a place to live. So I'm going to start off by introducing our first 2 speakers. So Councillor Annie Townsend and Dr. Anna Rutherford, who are co-chairs of the One City Culture Board, and they're going to talk a little bit about their vision for, if you like, Bristol's cultural ambitions, and how they would like to see that taken forward. So over to you, Annie and Anna.
Hello, thank you very much. Anna, are you able to share the slides? Possibly. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I'm Councillor Annie Townsend and I'm co-chair of the One City Culture Board with Dr. Anna Rutherford, who will be speaking after me. So in Bristol, culture, the approach that we take to culture is that it means far more than just headlines, events, and the big ticket stuff. It's like the everyday creativity, it's heritage, it's shared experiences, it's all of that that shapes who we are as a city. It's music, it's films, it's festivals, it's community-led activities, it's faith, it's food, and it's cultural traditions, and it's public art, and it's neighbourhood creativity that happens in every little corner of our city. And it's something in Bristol that it happens and actively happens with people actively making it and taking part in it, and it's not confined to a building or something that you have to pay for. In Bristol, we are internationally known for our culture, for our music, and for all of the wonderful things that we create here. We're a UNESCO City of Film. We have been for approaching 10 years. We've got the Bottle Yard Film Studios, which is the only local authority operated film studios in the country, and it's the largest TV and film complex in the southwest. Obviously, we've all heard of our wonderful, famous musicians, and music is very central to our identity. And we've got a very rich ecosystem of venues and promoters and festivals, some of whom are on the call. So that's lovely to see. We have wonderful museums. We've got the Museum and Art Gallery at top of Park Street, and we've got M Shed by the harbour. And then in addition to that, we've got other heritage buildings of the Red Lodge. We've got Roman villa, wealth of value here. And then the way in which Bristol City Council supports culture is in a number of ways. We've got the cultural investment programme, where we invest in organisations and festivals, and we've protected that for the lifetime of this administration, which has been a wonderful thing to be able to do. We've delivered major capital projects like Bristol Beacon, and we work in partnership with the city and the sector through the One City Culture Board that myself and Anna co-chair, through the first cross-party cultural working group of councillors that we've had in living memory, and partnership working. And through that, we embed culture into everything that we do, into health, into regeneration, and into our climate priorities as well, to meet the climate emergency. And then we are developing a cultural strategy, which is updating on a 10-year-old cultural strategy, and the world has changed in every conceivable way in the last 10 years. And we're shaping that with communities, with artists, with organisations across the city. And it's a simple but powerful ambition to make culture part of everyday life in Bristol, supporting wellbeing, inclusion, and a thriving creative sector and economy for the long term. I'm going to pass over to Anna, who's going to talk more about some of the impact that culture has for our city. Although she looks a little frozen on my screen.
Anna, I think you're on mute.
Is that working now? Can you see the next slide?
Yeah,
great. Yeah, so I'm Dr. Anna Rutherford. As Annie said, I have the honour of co-chairing the Culture Board with Annie. Originally a scientist, actually, and I set Pride up in Bristol, and that for me was a moment when I kind of saw firsthand the many benefits of culture to people and place. And now I have a slightly different perspective, because I work at that really interesting interface between the built environment and culture, as CEO of Design West, based on the harbour in Bristol. And I think, as Justin said, culture is a really key part of the social, civic and economic infrastructure of a successful city. And I think we can map that to kind of individuals, so whether the level of the individual and the kind of health benefits, connection, and the joy, which I think we don't talk about enough, really, the joy, the happiness created by culture, and participate in culture, but also the skills, the confidence, the empathy that culture gives us, that ability to understand other people in our cities. And yeah, when I set up Pride in Bristol, we did have people report to us firsthand how reductions in their own self-harm, improvements in mental health, improved relationships in workplaces, with employers, within their families and within their communities. And just that one activity really of the Pride Festival gave people freedom to be themselves and confident, but that had a huge ripple effect out into the city. And I think it's something that we don't really think about. We probably didn't capture it. We didn't have any capacity at the time to think about capturing that, but we knew it. And then on the culture board, our job really is to look at culture at the city scale, where culture defines the brand of a place. So as a city, we are competing for talent globally, and we're competing for investment, and we're competing for jobs. We know that a kind of Centre for Cities research tells us that the cultural offer of a place, leisure and restaurants, is the top factor in people deciding where they live. And I think reflecting back really on Justin's point about sort of fairness, at the moment the cultural sector is generating wealth, but it's not able to capture a lot of the wealth that it's generating to feed back into itself, which is a real challenge for a city. And then thinking about that kind of competition for global talent, how Bristol can succeed and set itself apart, I know from personal experience, as a young scientist, I was offered a PhD at Cambridge. I could have had a very different life, but instead I chose to move to Bristol. And why? Actually, because it felt lively and interesting in the city. For me, like Watershed and Thekla were really key for me as a young person, why I wanted to spend my life here. We compete for tourism as well, and I think a lot of people didn't notice that in October, Bristol was the only UK city named in the top 50 travel destinations in the entire world by Lonely Planet. Why? Our street art. That was the main thing that set us apart. So I think we know investing in culture gets people spending money through the economy. It builds health, well-being, social cohesion. It builds civic pride, trust, and ultimately safety. So it saves us huge downstream social costs. And I think as a city, we've been very good at making culture happen here, although that's becoming a lot harder as the city gentrifies or gets richer in some ways. But we've been quite poor historically at measuring and shouting about the impact of culture. And so last year, we started to get quite serious as a sector, and the council, in partnership with the sector, led a research commission working collaboratively with 54 organisations across the city. And as a result of that work, the Bristol Cultural Impact Report was created, and it revealed that So culture generates 893 million economic impact a year, including, and I like this, 122 million in social value, so that community building, well-being, employment and education. And it also saved the NHS £123 million in 1 year. Now that's huge. The sector reached 10.9 million people. And a stat I particularly like is that for every pound the council invested into culture, arts organisations were able to leverage a further £88 into the city. And as a city, then we've really gone from being behind the curve on impact and understanding the impact of culture to being one of the best. As Annie said, we were leading the way at a recent UNESCO conference that she went to. And I think there's some really exciting research going on with universities to look scientifically and physiologically at what happens to you at the moment. Like, so what happens to you when you sing? What happens to you when you listen to a live concert? How does that have a benefit on your health? Why does that make you feel better? And I think we're committed as a sector continuing to kind of build this data set and research to inform council policy and to continue to push for investment, because investment in culture is a political choice that as citizens we can all ask for, and it's an investment choice for the businesses that are based here. It's a choice for us to invest in if we can as citizens, and we can all choose to invest in the things that make us well and successful as a city, and not just invest vast amounts of money in picking up the pieces downstream. So that's really my kind of sharing of where we're at, but also I guess a little bit of a provocation to us of what we do to continue to capture some of the wealth we generate in order to continue to support culture in this city.
So thanks, Anna, and thanks, Annie. That's a great start, I think, to the discussion. We're now going to move to Emma Harvey and Latoya McAllister-Jones, who are going to reflect, I think, on the UK 2029 City of Culture bid and their thoughts coming out of that. So over to you, Emma and Latoya.
Hi, I'm hoping Jess is going to be on the slide. So I'm Emma. You might know me from such places as Trinity Centre, Hot Wells, Jacobs Wells Baths, and a project called Citizens for Culture, which I'm going to hand over to Latoya to introduce once we're on the slide. This is my provocation. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Latoya McAllister-Jones, and you all know me from such places as St Paul's Carnival, Trinity and Jacobs Wells Baths now. Yeah, one of the founding partners for the Citizen of Culture project alongside Emma and David Jubb. David Jubb runs an organisation called Citizens in Power, but back in the day he was the chief exec for Battersea Arts Centre. So yeah, this first slide, let's do this, Bristol, unofficial City of Culture. You know, it's a bit tongue in cheek, but you know, we are without a doubt a City of Culture, and regardless of the disappointing outcome of not being longlisted, that doesn't change the fact that we are a City of Culture. It's in everything that we do and say and how we express ourselves. The street art. If we were a stick of rock and you cut us, culture would run through that. So we wanted to start this off reminding people that despite the fact that we weren't longlisted for that, we are a City of Culture and we have got work to do. Next slide, please. So when we brought together a group of people to kind of push that EOI over the line for the City of Culture bid. But this was when we did that, we talked a lot about that City of Culture bid, should we have been successful, would have been an extension and a way of responding to the Citizens for Culture project that we ran between September and November of 2025, where we brought together, you know, some of you will know this, but 51 representative citizens from across the west of England who came up with this shiny, lovely cultural plan for the region, which is getting attention on a local, regional, national, international scale, because it's the first of its kind. People have done sort of assemblies around culture before, but the fact that we have a plan for the region that's been written by citizens is a first. So it's a real, as Lisa Nanny says, a shining example of how we can put communities at the heart of cultural decisions and that impact them. And that's what the assembly was about. Emma, do you want to add anything to that there?
I was just going to say, like, stay tuned. Hopefully Neil Magg's film will be imminently dropping for audiences. And that's just a really nice overview, which sort of follows, like, I think 6 of the citizens around, like, about their experience of creating this plan. So I was ready for a load of people to turn around and say, why are we talking about culture at a time when we're all broke and it's not really that important, when, you know, we've got other priorities. And I was like really blown away with how important culture was to everybody. It just reaffirmed my love of all things Bristol and the region. So anyway, there we go. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
So yeah, so I guess building on what Latoya was saying, about like a citizen-led plan, like I guess what our hopes are is that, you know, the work that we've done for the expression of interest isn't wasted, and that, you know, we can still lead with a citizen-led plan and placing citizens at the heart of what we do and how we shape our cultural offer over the next sort of 3 years. Why would we want to do that? Because, you know, I think it aligns with what Bristol is. Like, Bristol is a city of the people, you know. Jacobs Wells Baths is a shining example of that. It was a building built off of the back of a cry of the poor, like 16 working people didn't have anywhere clean to bathe, and they demanded somewhere clean to bathe, and that's why that building was built. So, you know, we're a city that is rooted in citizens having a say and getting stuff done. You know, I think it strengthens our case for that inward investment. Like, we didn't get this application for DCMS this round, but there's plenty of other funding opportunities to go for. I'm a fundraiser, and you know, there's a kind of famous fundraising phrase, albeit not particularly fitting in the post-Me Too era, but it's 9 no's and a yes is still a yes. So you make of that what you will. But, you know, in my view, work is never wasted. And I feel what happened with the effort and the energy put behind our City of Culture bid is everybody got behind it. And we got behind not just the concept of the bid, but the citizens plan. Some of the key aspects of the bid around, you know, some of the work Curiosity Unlimited's doing around Bristol being a kind of birthplace of civil rights in the UK and stuff like that. So, you know, really intrinsic things to the city's identity, a bit like what Justin was saying, you know, what is it that makes our place? And I think the plan gives us the potential to you know, seek beyond the walls of Bristol. Like, our cultural ecology is not constrained by geographical boundaries. There's, you know, a lot of other people's City of Culture bids rest on artists from within our city going off and delivering in other places. So I think it helps us to build, you know, think of it as an ecology. You know, we're like the mushrooms underground, all connecting and weaving those threads together. And it is a national priority. You know, we've got community empowerment bill coming fast down the line, and we're really, you know, Pride in Place, lots of stuff like that. So, you know, it's really about saying how does culture, a bit like what Justin was saying, it improves our daily lives. It's for public good. It's not just about this sort of market forces, you know, when the market forces are done and dusted, we're all still here.
We are all still here. And I think, you know, it is about sort of that decision making as well, you know, with citizens. One of the things that came out of that citizens assembly, which we knew, but it really sort of gave it a platform, is that everyone has a cultural life. All citizens have a cultural life, and culture impacts on all of us every day. That everyday culture thing, and as sort of cultural leaders, or whatever phrase you want to use, is how do citizens see themselves represented in the culture in the city and across the region, and then how do they get to shape what that cultural offer looks like in the city and across the region, so that it looks like them. And for me, that really is about us being able to hear what our citizens have to say, and how and at what point are they able to influence that decision making about what culture looks like and what it feels like. And for the cultural plan is a way of hardwiring that decision making from our citizens from much earlier into the system, so they're not just recipients of what we deliver, they inform what we deliver. It's influences what we deliver, and we deliver with them, we share power with them. And that for me feeds into the idea of stronger regional collaboration, and having a much better connected cultural ecology, like an ecosystem, which includes funding, citizen voice, events, all of the things that make up that cultural ecosystem across the region and in our city. This is what the citizens cultural plan helps us to be able to see and to deliver together.
Next slide, please, Jess. So I'm pitching here. I'm pitching a hard pitch here, guys, that money or not, let's be an unofficial City of Culture. Let's make it happen. We're a city that gets shit done. And I don't see, all right, a small matter of £10 million might have made it slightly easier, but no bother. Let's give it a go. And I think, if we're going to embrace that, I think it's about embracing some of these aspects around the citizens plan and the work that's happened to create that EOI, which is, you know, this idea that we're a city without boundaries, you know, and that goes for us being, you know, a kind of city that is based within a really diverse region, but also, you know, we're a city that does, yeah, punch above our weight and deliver, you know, nationally, internationally, lots of amazing things. You know, as Anna already mentioned, you know, the cultural economy, and the impact that is demonstrated there with the value that's added to our businesses, that's, you know, attracting people to come and live here and call it their home, to pay their council tax subs, you know, so there we go, money going in. Maybe the donut economics might come back to us at some point, we'll see. And, you know, we're a local to global city. You know, this is a city of sanctuary, as we've said, you know, a city of civil rights. And also, I think it's a bit of a microcosm of the rest of the country, which includes a lot of challenges, right? You know, I don't think anyone's missed sort of flag wars going on, and, you know, whatever side you're on, you know, it's people who are out there looking for change and saying that they want their identity and their voices to be heard. And it's our job as cultural leaders and institutions to be listening to that, responding to that, and making sense of all of those disparate parts. And I think that's what culture can do really well, better than a lot of other things. And aside from anything else, we're authentically ourselves. As Anna mentioned, you know, it's music and it's street art, and they're the things that are bringing people here, and probably they're the things that are the least resourced aspects of our cultural sector, and yet they're the most internationally known aspects of who we are. So just kind of goes to show we can get this thing done without the cash. So that's kind of what I'm hoping we can all work on together. And how are we going to do that? Next slide, please, Jess. So forgive the chat GPT graphic here, please do not flagellate me too much. We are intending to get this designed by a creative practitioner. This is just a little kind of rough idea about kind of what the Bristol Culture Network is in the city, and it sort of shows the citizens and our communities at the heart of what we do, and all of the other different cultural networks that kind of exist within the city that kind of make the city who we are. I think the point of this graphic is that the city's cultural ecology rests on like relational infrastructure. So the stuff that gets stuff done and makes things happen within the city tends to be less about money, although money is, you know, money makes the world go round. No one's, you know, we've all got bills to pay. But, you know, the things that really drive change within the city and make things happen are the people, and all of the different networks and the way those networks interconnect to deliver things that are greater than the sum of their parts. There's some challenges to that, because it means that like there's risks of like nepotism if you don't know where these networks are, if you know, if you're not part of them already. How do you get a foothold within that kind of cultural ecology? But then, you know, within that, there is a strength to it, because it means that, you know, it's much harder to take that away, because the relationships will still be there, regardless of whether or not there's resource to make those things happen. So this was kind of one of the kind of areas that we were hoping that as part of the process between the expression of interest to main application, we'd start to develop this up a little bit more so that the networks talk to each other better. There was much more transparency about those entry points. So if I'm like an artist and I'm new to the city, or I'm a business and I want to get involved, there's much clearer entry points as to where I'm going to go if I want to have a say about the city's cultural offer, or I want to kind of take part. Latoya, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
I guess I just want to. This really reminds me of the kind of stakeholder model that we built for the Citizens Assembly. The cultural plan sits in WECA at a regional level, but all of these different nodes, all of these different sector partners and networks all have a hand in delivering on creativity and culture across the city. It's not one delivery partner who has, whether, you know, they have money to fund it, etc., etc. It's the freelancers, it's the small businesses that support and things like the bid. It's funders, it's buildings, it's artists, it is all of us. And this graphic really just serves as a reminder that we all play a part in delivering on culture and creativity in the city.
Next slide, please, Jess. So this is my last but one slide, little bit of a kind of provocation here for people. So how do we make stuff happen without cash? Well, part of it is about shifting our own mindsets, because we're all part of the problem as well as part of the solution. So this is just my little kind of rant about our social structure at the moment. You know, we're kind of seeing lots of rise of authoritarianism globally. We're, you know, seeing the death throes of neoliberalism. The market is not going to save us. Exponential growth is going to have an end point. You know, we are seeing deliberative representative democracies pop up, not just locally but globally, where people are forming citizens' assemblies and citizen juries, and that's becoming more of a way that people are trying to make sense of all of the things that aren't quite working, as you know, the market forces won't save us, and as people try and consolidate power within those existing structures. And also, as I mentioned, there's this liberational energy where people are just like, I just want change. I just want to roll the dice, I want to flip a coin, and I want to make change. And so within that, we're all citizens like that. We're all citizens being pulled in those different directions. And we've got choices to make. We've got choices as to whether or not we are, when we hold power, we can say computer says no, or we can try and find an enabling approach to making stuff happen within the power that we have. We can say we don't have any money, or I could just rock up now and say Trinity's an organisation that employs 50 people, and last year our turnover was 1.6 million. And actually, you know, this idea that we're a broke city is not true, and we have to start pushing that back up the hill, because every time we tell that lie, we're telling it to someone with less money than us. We can say we don't have time and we can't contribute to these structures that make change because, you know, it's just too much for us. But actually, you know, if we're all saying that, then nothing changes. So we're all citizens in this place. And even if we're giving that little bit of time to making a decision to go into a network, that will make the difference to joining those dots up. And also we can disagree respectfully. So, you know, one of the things I remember someone saying to me when I moved to Bristol is Bristol's a city that's soft on the outside and spiky on the inside. And I'm hoping that people understand what that means. But it's a city that I don't believe disagrees respectfully. I think it's a city that's actually quite spiky underneath. And I think if we're going to work together, we've got to work on working with people who we don't like and we don't agree with, but we want to make change. We want to make the city better together. And if we're going to do that with some sort of common purpose, I think that's where the city will start to speak better with one voice. And things like investment will then start to flow because the stuff will all make sense.
And some of this stuff is, you know, as speaking to Emma's point about those difficult conversations with people we don't like. One of the things that's really come to me from the assembly is that culture is a route into those conversations, because it starts the conversation in a different place. Culture starts a conversation which is about your shared lived experience, not about your beliefs. And when you start the conversation from a different place, it tends to not be as spiky. You tend to connect with people through our shared cultural experiences. Is there a last slide there?
That's it. Last slide is just the question for the floor then, and then hopefully people will have something to say.
Yeah, so this is really a question about leaning into this. What are we each willing to change, give up, or risk to make it real?
Thanks so much, Emma and Latoya. That's great to hear you expand on that whole notion of a kind of citizen-led, you know, citizens at the centre of a whole cultural strategy. So we're now going to have a panel discussion for a few minutes, and then we're going to open up to questions from participants in this webinar. If you have any questions as you're thinking about it, as you're thinking about what people have said, or during the discussion, please do post them in the Q&A, and then we'll try and get to as many of those as we can. But I'd like to start things off first, actually, by going back to Emma and Latoya, and you talk about, you know, clearly impassioned way about how important it is to put citizens at the heart of a kind of cultural approach and strategy. And you also talked about how difficult that can be, you know, that leads to difficult conversations. But one of the things that it might mean that you end up doing, and I'm just asking you both just to get your reflections on this, what you might end up doing is finding yourself at loggerheads with some of the traditional sort of cultural agencies that have been received kind of Arts Council funding in the past. Yeah, it might be that people say, actually, those are not spaces I feel particularly comfortable in. Those aren't art forms that particularly speak to people like me. What do you do with that? You know, if the citizens are saying, actually, this is the culture that we want to see, and it doesn't necessarily nap onto what already is there and what the institutions are there, how do you deal with that?
Well, I think for me, it's the whole point of the citizens plan is to help inform what we deliver and what that looks like.
Yeah.
And so that it's centered around lived experience and what our citizens are saying is important to them. I think that your question also comes up against the reality, what already exists, and what are the kind of the business needs of all of our cultural institutions. So when from an assembly point of view, it's not just about saying, well, what do you want then? And then it comes back, we want 10 new festivals. And we're just like, well, we don't have money for that. You have to you have to go, well, these are the red lines. This is this is where you can affect change. And this is where we can have that conversation. But there are also other areas where citizens can influence, but not necessarily just wipe the slate clean. For me, it's about setting up expectations and making sure that you don't set yourself up for failure by opening the floodgates and saying you can influence all of this. That's not how real life works. But there are ways that we can hear our citizens and that we can that their lived experience can influence how we shape our offer.
I think in the plan it's much less about the kind of subjective what and more like the how. So like, you know, some of the priorities that came out around Bristol actually were talked a lot about transparency and accountability and people like feeling like they understand how these decisions are made, or, you know, feeling like they don't have a say. So it's sort of less about, oh, I want more theatre and less dance, or more music and less, you know, more punk and less opera or whatever. It's more about
Can we
kind
see the
of
data around
rootsy stuff.
funding decisions?
Yeah, can we understand why freelancers aren't paid properly? You know, that was something that the Assembly members were super cheesed off about. You know, why is pay so poor within the sector? You know, so it's those sorts of fundamentals, I think, that people care more about.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. And I mean, just coming back to Anna and Annie in terms of your presentation, and you were making a strong case with lots of data. Annie, you presented lots of data about the importance of culture, both economically but also socially and in terms of well-being. How do you, I mean, this is something I think that probably a lot of people in this room have found themselves in rooms with quite sort of hard-headed policymakers for whom, you know, only a few things really matter, and they see culture as a bit fluffy and nice to have, but not something that's, you know, fundamental. How do you change that? How do you make, if you like, culture part of the foundational economy? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's from my point of view as a politician, for want of a better word, it's about making the pitch and the argument to the people that you're dealing with in the room. So we all know the intrinsic value of culture because we create it. I'm a theatre professional by myself, and so it's quite hard to make that flip into talking about it in purely economic, cold hard cash figures. But that is the argument that you need to make in terms of economic generation, in terms of social value generation, when you are talking to the people who are holding the purse strings. So that's what we did when it came to doing the cultural impact data. And that came from, particularly when we were doing, when the beacon was being regenerated, and one of the papers that came to a cabinet committee was that there were about 1,250 people working in the cultural sector in Bristol pre-pandemic, and then after the pandemic it was 1,000. And I read those papers and I thought, I can count on the back of an envelope just the organisations that I work with, and that totals more than 1,000 when you take into, I know everybody's working in the freelance sector, people working at the Bristol Vic Theatre School, in the theatres, all those sorts of things. And it's like, okay, we do need to really quantify the actual numbers that we're dealing with to really bake in and bring home to those people who are, local authority budgets are being forever squeezed, and you get to a point where it's played off between, can we have this nice to have cultural thing, or do we pay for adult social care? And what we've demonstrated with the data is that actually we're saving money for adult social care, we're saving money for social cohesion, we're saving money, and it isn't about saving money, we know it's not, but in terms of people making the funding decisions, we save the entire city money by our value that we bring from an economic and social value.
I agree with Annie. I think we do have to get better at talking economics. Like, these decisions are made by people, budgetary decisions are made by people that deal with numbers, and so we need to be better at communicating value. I think we are getting better, so I think we're stepping forward into that space better. I'm really interested in how the sector, so I think we all agree that kind of culture is a human right. So and therefore it needs investment so that everyone has access to culture, because we leave it to market forces, we will not all have access to culture in the same way. So that needs some kind of subsidy or investment. And so there's an interesting thing, really, which is that we know that culture generates money. It generates money for the economy, for the wider economy in a city. But it's really bad at capturing that value. I mean, I know just from, I run the folk festival in my spare time, and booking artists' rooms this year was double the price of last year in hotels. And I asked ChatGPT, why is it so expensive at the same point in the year? And they said, oh, there's a folk festival going on in the city, and there's the Greatest Showman. And I thought, well, we need to, so that's, as a culture board, some of the things that we will take forward is looking at the overnight visitor levy. And so how does culture, it does need investment. How do we benefit from some of the wealth that we generate for others? And that is, some of that's public money and cost savings, but some of it is private money from visitor levies, and from businesses that benefit. That they can attract talented workforce because they live in a culturally vibrant city. So how does culture get some of that benefit to reinvest back into itself, so that culture is accessible to everyone, and also so that amazing international cultural things can happen that couldn't happen without investment?
Yeah, and it's your point about gathering data is a really interesting one, and I think it's not an obvious thing for cultural workers to do, because it seems a bit nerdy and boring. But actually, if you're going to make the case to politicians, then mapping the size and scale of the sector is almost the first thing you have to do. And when we set up Creative Cardiff, that was the first thing we did. And we now have an interactive map that runs across Wales that shows you the strengths of all the sectors, how many people employed, the size of it by postcode across Wales. And, it tells the story in a way that's sort of very solid and difficult to argue with. So, yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. Emma, you had your hand up.
I wanted to respectfully disagree about the importance of economic data. I think it's a bit of a distraction to keep us busy. I say that simply because the youth sector were told to do it, and it made no difference to cutting youth services. Voluntary, social care, like social sectors told, measure the pounds saved, made no difference to cutting VCS like services. Our civic and our buildings, our civic and social infrastructure has faced similar patterns. And I feel that culture is now in that kind of last, and culture has largely, I think, avoided the pressures that other sectors face because it's already seen as generating economic value. So while I would say, if a funder is absolutely desperate for you to count, your GVA or your local economic multiplier effect, I'm not as convinced that it is the case that really sells it to politicians who right now, I would say, are more worried about what the next election cycle is going to bring, and the increasing social division within our country. And I think that is much stronger a case that culture can build a much stronger case around our ability to build cohesion, our ability to actually hold our social fabric together. And really the question, I don't know any politician whose eyes has lit up, any numbers that I've ever said, but I tell you what, you put them on a hard hat and you wander around Jacob's Wells and oh my God, they're absolutely loving it. People love real things. They love getting sweaty in clubs, digging up carrots and getting mud under their fingers, and sharing a drink with friends. And I don't really believe that the numbers are as powerful as we'd like to believe that they are.
Annie, do you want to come back on that?
I do. And I absolutely, I do understand where you're coming from with that. And it isn't the only part of the solution, because it does also require political will. It requires the people making those decisions to be open to knowing and being, it's the ones that are on the fence and they're thinking about it as a nice to have, where the data and the finances help tip people over. You've shown me around your building and you'll have shown lots of politicians around Jacobs Baths, loads of different buildings, and they will say all the right things, but when it comes down to it, as much as they love a building, as much as they love going out for a pint or going to a club, will they actually make the decision based on, oh, I quite enjoy this, or will they make the decision to fund something because it has cold, hard economic responses and values to it? And unfortunately, it's the latter. And I hate saying that. Don't worry, this is not where my values sit. I hate having to make this argument, but unfortunately, it is the one that we have to make. I was recently in Barcelona for the UNESCO Mondial Cult conference, and it was focusing on how culture, arts and culture in all the senses of the word culture, can help us tackle the climate emergency and provide the response to the climate emergency, how to aid social cohesion, because it's not just in this country, it is across the world. And there were people from every, not absolutely every extended country, but every UNESCO site across the globe were there having these conversations about how culture can be the answer to social cohesion, and having the data to make the economic argument, we've recently met with Ukraine culture minister to talk about how we are embedding culture in our regeneration of our city. We've got the Temple Quarter being one of the biggest regeneration projects in Europe. How does Ukraine, who are fighting a cultural war, when they rebuild their country, how do they embed culture into it and also make that economic argument to the people funding that regeneration and that rebuilding? And it does, unfortunately, always come down to the money. And that's where the data, but also making the emotive argument where you can as well.
I mean, obviously we could continue this discussion for a while, but I want to shift us onto something else here. And my own view, for what it's worth, is actually we kind of need we need both. We need some of the harder data, but I also think we need the kind of stories that Emma's talking about as well, and the experiences, because without that, the data feels flat. It doesn't breathe. It's not brought to life. Just a question for all of you, just individually. We're about to move into the open part of the discussion, but before we do, just a quick question for you all. And again, please do post something if you've got a question you want to ask or a comment you want to make. But it's to try and think about what recent development or piece of evidence or whatever do you think best encapsulates Bristol's potential as a cultural city? Just pick one. It can be small scale, it could be tiny, it could be a big thing. Just something that captures the spirit of it. Anyone have a go at that?
What's the question? So anything like project based or?
Yeah, or any recent development or a thing that's happened or a project that encapsulates it, or any of those sorts of things that you feel is the sort of captures the spirit of where you think you'd like to see Bristol develop as a cultural city.
Oh, that's a Tough one.
It's a tough one.
It's tough.
I'm
I
just
just
gonna bang
love
on.
everything. Well, I want to say props to my grassroots music buddies, actually. There's like Bristol, as everyone said, known for grassroots music. I think Bristol is unlike any other city with how many brilliant, really different grassroots music venues we've got. Some of my best nights have been to some of the smallest gigs in the tiniest little spaces. And I think, there's a lot of work going on with sort of nationally with like Music Venues Trust around how do we protect that infrastructure? How do we own more of our venues? How do we sort of protect that cultural infrastructure for the future? So that we're not losing those venues as the city rapidly develops. So I'm just going to say props to them.
That's a good one, Emma. I think that kind of idea that the sector can do things for themselves. So if we understand that economically the small venues aren't working right now, but they're really important part of the ecosystem, then how can we put a ticket levy on everyone? And obviously more of the money from that will come from the larger venues, but how can we therefore use that to support the bits of the grassroots system that most need investment? I think that's a brilliant initiative. I would also say like the fact that we made Bristol Beacon eventually happen, that we did the name change, that it was a difficult project, but that we have a wonderful space that has got loads of diversity of artists going on, and we are seeing Bristol artists making their way onto those stages now, plus tying it into the youth music. So that's a great thing. And Bristol's often says it doesn't manage ambition very well, but actually we've done something massive and ambitious. That was the biggest project, I think, after the Tate Modern in Britain. So, great.
Annie, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to give another shout for the grassroots activities and festivals, whether or not it's St. Paul's Carnival being a very obvious, wonderful one, that it happens not entirely organically. And I know that you do a lot of work with it, Latoya, to like make it actually happen well, and it takes, and Pride being another one, but all of these things are grassroots. And then you've also got art trails and pop-up exhibitions that happen. Art trails I particularly love because it's basically a collection of artists in a location opening their homes. Maybe it could happen in a bar or a cafe that's there, or a community space, and it kind of anybody in theory can exhibit their work in that particular context. And it can be visual art, it can be music, it can be a performance, it can be a range of things, in a way that it's just happening, and it's grassroots. And from those things, quite often you get a lot of amazing artists using it as a springboard onto other activities. I used to run an arts trail in Bristol, and from that there were people who showed their first work in that arts trail. It was in Montpellier and St. Paul's, and they showed their work there for the first time, and some of them are now world-renowned artists. They've really done very well and very successfully. And I think that's one of the many different ways that Bristol just springs up and does it. And that's quite often, I think, so often culture happens sort of despite so many obstacles in the city, it thrives and does it anyway. Or the council or society said no, but artists do it anyway. And that's what I love about Bristol.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah,
I'm just going to bang on about my own project, really. I think the Citizens
bang on away, Latoya. Yeah.
I think the Citizens Assembly project is for me a real example of how Bristol can get stuff done. Like that project was born out of mine and Emma's frustration of how we and the fact that we lead.
Oh, as if I ever get frustrated, Latoya. I am an ocean of calm.
Community-led arts organisations. How do we get our citizens to how do we turn the decision making the other way around? And that kind of frustration that we felt went on to deliver a project that went regional and is influencing the cultural strategy for the region, and brought together 51 random citizens who probably, if you went to them and said, what's your cultural life, they wouldn't have been able to answer that. But they came to that project, and they were able to influence and have their voices heard. And I think that those are the two St Paul's Carnival, Trinity Arts, two Bristol-based organisations that built that project over 4 years and delivered that, and has got that ongoing regional impact. So for me, that's an example of just getting shit done. Even it's taken us 4 years to do it, but I'm going to put my own project as the example.
And why not? Okay, I think we should probably open up the discussion now to people participating in this. Jude, do we have some questions that have come in?
We definitely do. So I'm going to start off with one from Mary Helen Young, which says there has been an announcement for further cultural championing by combined authorities such as WECA in the devolution bill. Is there more collaboration that should or needs to happen with WECA to support Bristol locally, or has the Citizens Assembly and Regional Cultural Plan embedded that collaboration sufficiently? So what that relationship with WECA, where's it at? Where does it need to be?
Am I going to take that one?
Well, I think it's a continual piece of work, right? You can never think that you've got somebody's buy-in just because they say, yeah, great, one time. You've got to keep knocking at their door. But it's going to be how the post-assembly structure embeds into the regional authority structure so that then the plan has teeth, and we've luckily got a little bit of budget that we've got to make that happen. So
and from a sort of city perspective, through the Culture Board, we have a place on the Cultural Compact that works with the West of England. So there are structures set up to ensure we work together. And to be honest, I think Bristol will do quite well, because a lot of the kind of creative industries money that's coming is directed at film and music, and we have the biggest music organisations in this city in the West of England, and we have the Bottle Yard Studios and the biggest film infrastructure based in this city. So quite a lot of the work will actually be how does the rest of the region benefit, and not just Bristol.
Yeah, and we're also making sure that we embed as many of the recommendations from the Citizens Assembly in Bristol's cultural strategy as we bring that forward as well. So at every level, we'll do what we can, and we'll continue working with Emma and Latoya to make sure that it is all properly embedded as it should be. And it's agile.
And I'll just mention that we have three sort of time horizons with that with the priorities. One is around short-term sort of investment. The second is around collaboration, and the third is around systemic change. So that collaborative piece is built into the priorities, because as Emma was saying earlier, over and above the actual money, that across the city and across the region, our cultural organisations and institutions being able to collaborate more effectively will bring change to how people experience culture. So collaboration is a key part of the priorities as they are now.
I'll just jump in and say that's really great to hear from this is a One City webinar, and it's fantastic to hear collaboration being central to the approach going forward. That's what we're all about. Can I bring in another question? I've also just been nudged to say that just a reminder for anyone who wasn't here at the start that we're using the Q&A function rather than the chat function. So that should be at the top of your screens if you haven't found it yet. So if you do have any questions, that's the place to place them. But the next question is from Carly, which is, it would be great to hear how you feel this could fit into the age-friendly agenda, or how the age-friendly goals can support the aims that you're working towards. It's an interesting kind of demographic we haven't really touched on, especially as the Council and Age UK, Bristol are about to refresh this strategy and action plan. Any thoughts?
I'd say maybe because we've got the One City boards working together, we've been working groups, and so the Culture Board is working with the Health and Wellbeing Board. I think that's the right name for it, isn't it? So it'll be through that mechanism that we can work to bring this forward. I must admit, I'm not entirely up on everything that they're doing with the that approach, but from what I've seen, it is fantastic. I know Lorraine Francis, the councillor in charge of the Adult Social Care Policy Committee, has been working quite a lot on that. So yeah, we're probably due for another conversation.
Yeah, it would be
on
good,
that.
wouldn't it, Annie? So
Yeah.
we've recently done our action plan against the One City's 4 missions, and actually the thing that people have most spoken about in our culture board and been most interested in is probably young people and like access to culture for young people. So that we have a little working group that we're looking at a children's kind of passport to culture across the city and how the sector might help to deliver that. But I think age friendly is an interesting one. So yeah, possibly something that we can put a little bit of focus on. I even know at Design West, like we place our events and our courses and things play such an important role in sort of combating loneliness. Older people tell us that all the time. I'm sure Emma finds that at Trinity. But it'd be nice to pick that conversation up in terms of how the culture board could look at kind of other end of life as well.
Yeah, Emma's just pointed out some things in the chat as well about the Citizens Assembly Party. I don't know if you wanted to say them yourself, Emma.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, yeah, like some of the Citizen Assembly priorities, I guess, that like kind of echoed some of the age-friendly agenda was around like inclusion and accessible space within like our localities. And and also actually I was thinking about like, Bristol City Council have their co-production policy for adult social care as well. So I think like it sort of comes back to that networked approach. All the kind of component parts are there. It's just sometimes, something happens between the political will, like your councillors and your boards, and the kind of the people on the ground and the kind of, your kind of officers and your kind of frontline people. There's a layer of something going on in between, which I would say needs a little bit unpicking, a little bit scratching at the surface to see have improved accountability. Because while we're all out here being accountable, with our faces on webinars and that, I very rarely see some certain other folk. Do you know what I mean?
We did a joint kind of workshop with the health board, and there was a huge appetite actually for how culture could deliver kind of social prescribing, but how it could deliver social value. But at the minute, there isn't a clear mechanism for investment at scale, because actually we know that culture could provide so many things that would benefit people's health as they get older, and probably do it more cost effectively than some other services. But at the moment, there is not a kind of clear financial mechanism for doing that work, and that would be something wonderful for us to begin to work on. I don't think it's an easy fix, because it is not a clear pathway recognised centrally in central government, so it's difficult. But we could pilot in Bristol.
Well, it's like in Bristol, we do actually have something piloting in terms of the creative social prescribing. It's being orchestrated by Serona.
It's just very small, Annie, at the minute.
It is very small.
Exactly, it's a bit messy, a pathway. So we talked about it's sort of great, but how do we roll it out?
Exactly. So what I was going to say was, I know that Serona have been holding some work fairs. Again at the Beacon, which is wonderful, one of the things that they host, but I agree with you, it's not clear, it's certainly not tangible for quite a lot of creative practitioners. So I was lucky enough to get myself to sub onto a subcommittee, the health and wellbeing, I can't remember what it's called, one of the subcommittees within the council, where this was being discussed, and started a conversation with Serona directly about actually making tangible, clear pathways in. That's very much as its infancy.
Almost needs to be a button on a GP's computer, doesn't it? Like it needs to be a drop-down option on a GP's computer, and if it isn't, it's not going to. That needs
I mean, there's a huge amount of but I think for our angle of it, it's how do we help culture practitioners become social prescribers, because that's the bit that I don't understand, and I don't think anybody really quite understands. How you could be doing something already going into, say, talking about this through the lens of age, you could be somebody going into a care home or residential home on a regular basis, but on a small level, how do we help people doing that level up to being an actual social prescriber? That bit's not clear, and that's a conversation that we think we need to have at council level and also at a One City board level as well, which hopefully next time we do a health and wellbeing collab, we can push that through there a little bit more.
Great
Good.
example of the complexity, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. We'll see if we can see what we can do there. I'm just conscious that we're moving towards the point we need to be wrapping up. There's a great question here from Rosalie, which is, what would you suggest are the next steps if we want to make Bristol the unofficial city of culture, especially in terms of making sure we're appropriately better connected across networks? Emma, I feel you must have thoughts.
Well, I guess the start is just finishing off that map, making it a little bit less chat GPT and more like, you know, actually something that people want to get engaged with. And then like working out how we're going to like, you know, make sure there's clear touch points for key people. So where they have got questions like, you know, how do I get into social prescribing, that there's clear like entry points for somewhere for that question to go. Because again, like, you know, coming back to this point about, you know, the risks of building economic cases, is somebody like Serona sweeps in because they've got, you know, they're in, you know, huge company that are able to take on a contract, and that doesn't necessarily create the trickle down effect that we're all promised, you know. So I think we've just got to think about a little bit more about also what is it, what are our priorities, and how do we then build resource around the things that as a city we want to resource, and yeah, and just get our shit together and get some clear pitches together that we can put in front of people with cash, because in spite of popular belief, we're a flipping wealthy city and an even more wealthy country, so there's plenty of money out there.
Jude, is it time to wrap up at this point, or?
I think, yeah, that probably is a great note to move to a conclusion.
Well, thanks everybody, and this has been a great discussion. And you know, whenever I take part in discussions like this in Bristol, I'm always struck by the fact that Bristol is in great hands in terms of the people with the passion and the energy and the heart, I think, behind the creative industries in that city, which makes it a bit special. In a bit like my own city has its own sort of special characters in a not dissimilar way. Jude, anything you want to say to wrap up?
Really just to say a really big thank you to everyone who joined the webinar today. Thanks for your questions. There's some really thought-provoking ones there, which we really hope there would be. Thank you to all of you. So thank you to Anna, Annie, Latoya, Emma, and thanks to you, Justin, for giving us that outside perspective and stepping in with that that fresh set of eyes, as you said. Hopefully Jess is going to pop up on screen a slide just to finish us off in a moment, which is just so a couple of points around kind of including housekeeping. The recording for this will be in your inboxes for anyone who's registered for quite soon, and equally do take a look at our YouTube channel, where you can start to see building up a library of these webinars. This is only the second to go in, so library might be a bit of a grandiose term, but it'll become a library. And also just to say that if you'd like to stay in touch with this further webinar series, there will be more of these coming shortly, and other developments in the One City space. Back to some of these conversations actually about transparency and visibility and making this feel like, you know, One City and the culture is all something that's for people. That's a good way to stay in touch with everything that's going on, and so do take the opportunity to register for our newsletter. But otherwise, right on time, it's just to say, yeah, a final concluding thank you, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoons, and we look forward to seeing you on our next event. Thank you very much, everyone.
Right.
Bye-bye.